You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to begin? Look no further. The team at Dodge Media Productions has 20 years of experience as podcast listeners and observing the industry and 8 years experience in podcast production. We can help you take your podcast from idea to fruition, and we'll make the process seamless and easy. We'll help you with everything from recording and editing to hitting the charts on Apple Podcasts. So what are you waiting for? Contact us today and let's get started. DodgeMediaProductions.com.
Welcome. Bonjour. Today on the podcast, we're going to talk about a film we saw in theaters called Sentimental Value. We missed its original theatrical run, but Regal put it back in the theater because it was getting some Oscar buzz. I think they put all of the Best Picture nominees back in limited showings at their theaters, and I'm glad that we got a chance to go see it. This is a slower-paced, sedate film that I think I would have perhaps enjoyed more at home because the other people in the theater were horrible. There's so much coming and going. The first 15 minutes of the film was a stream of people coming in. Don't know if somehow it was not broadcast when the start time was, but I think what it was is uniquely, there were no trailers. It was a few commercials and then right into the film. So I wonder if other people have done what I think to do, which is to show up late to miss the trailers and the entree. So we had a bunch of people coming in, there were rappers, and then there's the one person who had to have a text message conversation throughout the film. Not sure about that. So I'm trying to push people to get back into the theater, but this was not the best advertisement. So the film is about an older, meaning slightly older than me, but not super old. I think he's supposed to be 70 maybe in the film, director Günther, who has had a wonderful career. We see with some retrospectives that he is well regarded for his work. And his two daughters. His oldest daughter, Nora, has also gone into acting, and the younger daughter, Agnes, we find out throughout the film as a child was in Günther's film, but has not pursued that. Now she appears to be mostly a mom, but she also does some work as a historian, it looked like.
Mm-hmm. I guess she helped him with research. It also seemed that her experience in her father's film wasn't entirely a good one.
I wasn't clocking early on when they showed the snippet from his most famous film that the daughter was the young girl actress. So that was a bit of a reveal for me. Spoiler, but I don't think it really affects things that you didn't know that. The older daughter, we see her, Nora, with a panic attack. We know she's supposed to go perform based on context clues and her costume.
It's a live theater performance. It's not a film. Yeah.
Right. So she has gone into theater and she's having a pretty massive panic attack and tries all sorts of things to try to get through it. And at one point, this is probably not the first time this has happened, she freaks out and causes wardrobe malfunctions, and the people backstage have to scramble to attempt to put her together to put her on. She goes on. People apparently like the work. And then later she's telling her sister how anxious she is, but she really, really loves it. And I don't know that we got that throughout the film. If she loved it, there was also a hate in that relationship. It didn't seem like she was particularly comfortable.
Not on stage, but I thought, I think it was something else I was watching, but I thought she said something like she liked the character breakdown. It seemed like when she was at what looked like a table read, a very informal, everyone, was on the stage around a folding table. It seemed like she enjoyed that process, like breaking down the character and talking about the character motivation, other characters. I think she liked that part of the process more than the performance part, is how I read it.
I could definitely see that. The performance part would be anxiety producing for me. As I've said before, I think it's a completely natural reaction when you have hundreds of apex predators staring at you to be a little self-conscious about yourself. But especially with theater, that's kind of the nature of the beast. You might be able to argue that in cinema, you're on set with a fewer number of people, so maybe that would be a little bit different. But theater seems so exposed. And we talked in a previous podcast about stand-ups being exposed, and I would think a theater actor, especially if it's like a monologue, would be similar. What I find interesting is the parallels between Nora's character and her father Gunther's character throughout the film. They don't get along very well. This is established in the trailer. And as we see through the film, I think there are more similarities than either one of them would like.
Which often happens in parent-child relationships.
We had previously watched a while ago I think it was 5-episode series about Martin Scorsese. And in there, one of the things that resonated with us is a sadness that his older two daughters didn't know him as much outside of filmmaking as when they were working with him on a film. I don't know if the filmmaker was aware of that when he wrote this, but definitely I see that also here. And as a director, I would hate to think that my kids would get the best of me only if they worked on one of my films, and that I reserved the best of me for only the people in the films and not my kids. So that is hard for me to see. And I think at first the character of Gunther, he comes across poorly as perhaps a little self-absorbed and a little distant. But as the film goes through, credit to the performance of Stellan Skarsgård as Gunther, we began to see him more as a sympathetic character. We find out about what happened with his mother, and this, I think, makes him a more sympathetic and compassionate character throughout the film. In some sense, this film is really about, I think, both Gunther and Nora together. Did you feel like either one was more of a main character?
I think I definitely probably saw him more as a main character and the two daughters as supporting. Maybe an argument could be made that Nora, the older daughter, is the main character. That's who we meet first. And we kind of follow, I guess, her experience through things in relation to the rest of her family. So yeah, that's a tough one for me to come down on definitively.
I think we see Gunther more on screen, but Nora feels to me like she is central to what's going on. At one point, there's a question of whether or not they would work together, which I don't think that's necessarily the central conflict of the film, but that's an important plot point. And we see both of those characters grow, I feel, throughout the remainder of the film. Now, the house is a key component of this film. And I asked the question right after we saw it of whether the director had seen the house first before writing the film around it, or if he wrote the film and then they found a house to fit it. From other things I've read, I think the house pre-existed. It sounds like that house, or maybe some exteriors of it, was in a previous of his films. But at the end of the film, we see a shot where it looks like it could be a sound stage. And I was curious your take from a production standpoint. How much do you think they did in the house that we see in the exteriors? Was that a facade too? Do you think it was a real house that they pushed film crew in? Or do you think most of the interiors were built elsewhere? What did you think?
It felt like to me that they were filming in that house, but production designers are so good these days that it very well could have been a sound stage. I caught one. So the home was painted black through most of the film, which sounds like an odd color, but it works in a Scandinavian kind of way because the trim was kind of like red and green. And so, it kind of seemed like it could fit in an old timey European, anyway. At a point during the film, the house was painted white. And I thought after it had been painted white, there was an image of a child leaving. And I thought I saw that the exterior was black. So I don't know if it's a continuity issue. I don't know if we were supposed to catch that or they were actually in the filming at the home and they didn't. Because when it looks like it was painted white, that could have been post-processed when we see the exterior and the home is white.
Correct.
So anyway, I guess to answer your question, I felt like the film was largely filmed in the actual house.
That was my feel up until the very end of the film. I felt like they did that, but as soon as I questioned it, I then began thinking, well, where would you fit a film crew in some of those rooms? Because obviously a house built 150 years ago would not have been built for filmmaking. But that was an interesting concept of the house almost being a separate character in that it had been there for many generations of that family. And there's a great scene about a thing which I thought was particular to our generation growing up in the US of on the doorway, the pencil marks measuring the children's heights and their ages.
You're saying you feel like that's America-centric? You don't think in other countries they do that?
Yeah, I thought it was just a silly thing that we did. I didn't realize other places would. I don't know why I thought that, but I just thought it was one of those quirks of U.S. culture that we use the door jamb to measure people. As I said, no particular reason why, just I thought that was a weirdness of my own childhood. But that shows us the time, right, that they've been in this house. And there's a funny gag about the furniture, a certain piece being from IKEA, which for a film that is set in Norway and has a character that is Swedish, I thought that was a nice nod. And they got a bit of a chuckle out of that. But ultimately, we see that Gunter is struggling to get this film made. And there's this additional character that's introduced, played by Elle Fanning, who is supposed to be a super duper famous Hollywood actress. And I said to you on the ride home that I was not sure that she didn't get the character and there was a disconnect there from a technical perspective, or if that was the intent, because the character in the film struggles with really connecting to a character in a film within a film, which I like. So I wondered if that was the director attempting to mirror those two and gave her the direction to be somewhat disconnected from the character. But I just felt her performance was not fantastic. There was something off there.
I didn't read it that same way because when we first meet Elle and she's talking to Gunter, they discuss, she seems like she's been on a bit of a, and I know I've heard actors talk about this before. They'll be filming like 2 or 3 movies back to back to back to back. And so you just go from set to set to set and you don't really get like a break. And I got that sense from her. Like because kind of you got to get while the getting's good. And so if you have a big hit or you win some awards, then you get offered a lot. And if you're a young actress, which I felt like Elle's character was supposed to be on the youngish side, that maybe she did just take like 3 big movies like back to back to back. And so she was feeling a bit exhausted. And while she was interested because she had previously seen some of his work and was really moved by it, I think she wanted to work with Gunter as a director, but she seemed already kind of back on her heels in a stamina kind of way, not in an acting sense. But I see what you're saying, but I think I just accepted more readily, okay, she's the hot actor of that time. And so that's why he was maybe drawn to her and felt like it would be a feather in his cap to have her in one of his films.
She has these 2 characters that follow her around, one man and one woman. I could never figure out specifically what their job title was, but they were handlers.
I think one was a publicist and one was an agent. It was spoken.
And there's a point where it's really quite humorous. Her character and these 2 are coming to the house, and Gunter closes the door basically in their noses and says, she'll be out and knows where to find you or something. So he goes to pains to keep them away from her, which lands as if she is thankful for that. And I could see that after having more years of experience in the business, he maybe doesn't care as much about what they think, or he is aware of how to handle them. There's an interview scene where he comes to her defense, which I think establishes that he's not a horrible character, but you could almost say it shows that he's willing to stand up for this actress more than he was for his daughter, perhaps, which is, I think, one of the kind of themes of the film. is how do you merge those? And that really resonated with me because after seeing, as I mentioned, the Scorsese documentary, I felt like they talked about how much filmmaking, whether you're an actor or a director, can consume your life.
And I think that I was trying to figure it out throughout the film. Was he feeling paternal towards her, or was he feeling romantic feelings towards her? And by the end of the film, I think he was just feeling very paternal and protective of her throughout the film.
Yeah, I never really got an icky, creepy feeling in that relationship, although there is dialogue implying that he had romanced some of his actresses in the past. Mm-hmm. I didn't get it in this particular case. I really liked how they showed the friendship he had with his producer, Peter. I think was the producer Peter or the cinematographer. Basically, his producer and his cinematographer he'd worked with for a long time. And there was really good storytelling through acting, in my opinion. When he went to talk to the cinematographer, he wanted to talk him into coming out of retirement to work on a film. And the guy got up and he had a cane and he was walking down a hallway. And just with his expression, you could tell that the character of Gunther was having reservations based on his friend's frailty.
And I couldn't decide if he was feeling like, I don't want him because he won't have the stamina, or he's lost a little bit, or, like he's frail, or did he not want someone around on set to remind him of how he was aging, or a little bit of both?
Yes. And at one point they call out Netflix throughout the film, which I find is interesting. It must not have been funded by Netflix and maybe won't air on Netflix, but they talk about Netflix wanting to have input on casting as well as crew decisions, which is, I think, very normal. When someone's giving you a big check, they want to have some input. But that could have been a component in that too. Would they consider an older cinematographer more of a risk? Because as you said, perhaps he's frail or he's lost a step. But as a person who's closer to the second half than the first half, I really enjoyed the way those characters were written. There was a certain amount of struggling with alcohol that the director had, but it came to me less out of this kind of rose-colored artistic thing and more just a guy who is struggling with his own life and how he's going to interact with his daughters. They show him with his grandson, who is a super cute kid. Mm-hmm. And I think that softens him and shows him a bit of a grandfather. But it's interesting. One of the activities he does with the son is he teaches him how to make films on his iPhone.
Mm-hmm. Which was very sweet. But then he was a nice grandfather, but you could tell how he was still kind of in his own head, because he brings to a 9-year-old's birthday party his films that are obviously very adult in nature, meaning they're of dramatic adult themes, not adult films. And so it just shows how clueless he is, and how, on one level, he's proud of his accomplishments and his work, and he probably, kind of wanting to leave a legacy and let your grandkid know who you are and what, I guess, you did in life, but also like, okay, give him those, but bring the gift of like a remote control car.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe this is the self-absorption of all directors, because we think that our film should be seen.
I realized I maybe agreed a little too quickly there.
Well, now I know what I'm going to get the kids for Christmas. Hey, it's a DVD of my first films. But
I can't really talk. On the bookcase near our TV, I think are 3 or 4 leftover DVDs that I burned with my first film on it. So I can't really say too much.
Yeah, I realized if I just sent the YouTube URL to the kids, I don't know if they'd watch it. So maybe at the next holiday, I'll make them sit down. We can't eat until they've sat through my films. That seems like such a director thing to do.
I think if you sent them, I think we should do a test. If you sent them the URL, especially of the latest one that you just released, I think they would watch it.
What if I inserted like 10 frames right in the middle with a word, and then I ask them afterward, what was the keyword? So what didn't Groucho Marx have a
We do
a
some
thing
A/B
like that?
testing.
Yeah. The older sister is played by an actress. Let's see if I get this right. Renate Reinsve.
Yes, that's Nora.
And the younger daughter is played by Inga. I'll skip the middle name because I'll brutalize it. Lilius. And I thought they didn't look exactly alike, but they looked, and more importantly, acted like sisters.
Very much.
There was a physicality to their interaction, and then the dialogue where they would tease each other and kind of tweak each other's nose. And at one point, Agnes, I think is the younger character's name, says, well, of course we got mad. That's what we do, or that's how we are. So I thought that was really well written, in that sometimes in film, they're either the best of friends or the worst of enemies, not this mixed bag, which I think is what siblings often go through. And later in the film, we find out that they have been there for each other throughout the momentous and difficult challenges in life. I really enjoyed both of their work. I think we saw perhaps a little bit more of the Nora character on screen, but both of them weren't there as much. And maybe this is the argument that Gunther was the main character because we saw maybe him more than anyone. I would say this is, in a sense, a film about really people. There was not a particularly big plot point. They weren't saving the Earth from an asteroid or trying to, I don't know, make enough money to buy an island in the tropics. It was about these people sorting out their relationships. And so that really resonated with me. I really liked that part of this film.
Yeah, it's I say slow, and that always kind of has a negative connotation. I think it was more deliberate.
Ooh, good word.
Slow, whenever we use that word, we always compare it to Mr. Holmes. That was just, the pacing is slower, but it felt appropriate to the story. So it's not slow in a boring way. We both want to be very clear to not indicate that, because we both loved this movie. And it was just, I think, like you mentioned earlier, the quiet nature of it. It's a very contemplative movie. And then it's thoughtful and deliberate, I guess, or maybe better words than slow. But it's definitely a beautiful, in cinematography and in tone and in story. It's a great movie on a rainy Sunday with a warm beverage, I think, to enjoy this one when it becomes available on streaming.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it before, but I'll reiterate. I think I would have enjoyed this movie even more if I didn't have the distractions of the other mouth breathers in the theater.
People just, unless someone is dying, which maybe you shouldn't be going to a movie if someone is dying, please just leave your phone in your pocket.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I want to be compassionate to maybe the parents who are trying to see a movie, but try your best, because these were older women who were sitting next to us, and I don't buy that someone was desperately needing their attention. I feel like, their notification for their Farmdale went off or something. I'm just annoyed. It distracts me. It takes me out of the film because your screen is shining in your face and illuminating you. So I can clearly see who I want to be mad at. Sorry, rant is over. But leave your phone in your pocket for 2 hours.
I was thinking if you're there for Expendables 5, I don't know you're going to distract anybody.
True.
But this film is, yes, contemplative is a real good word. Deliberate is a good word. But it is quiet. There's not a lot in the sound bed, not a very loud score. There's moments where the characters aren't speaking to each other. Another thing I just remembered, which I thought was kind of funny, is he brings a script to have someone look at. And I thought it was printed out. And I love that because I don't know that actually they print many scripts anymore. I think most people get the PDF and look at it on a tablet. But I love my stack of screenplays in my office. And I will probably continue to print out every screenplay, even just to have that stack. I don't know. There's something that's tactile, that's physical. It makes it real.
No, I like it. I just thought it was very brave. We're going off on a tangent. It was very brave of him because it wasn't bound by anything.
No.
And I'm always like, oh my God, what if there's page numbers, I suppose. But I was just like, oh my God, put that in a notebook or get some Brads or.
So back in the horrible days of computing, they had punch cards. And in the upper corner was a little box where you could number them. And every single person I know who used those says, you start out and you think, that's a waste of my time. I will not do that. I just won't mix them up. And then every person then at some point drops the box of punch cards and they can't reassemble them. And from then on writes the number in the corner. And I think you're right. Even with page numbers, it would be a hassle. I thought, couldn't you at least get a binder clip? Something.
It distracted me.
Yeah. But so this is in some sense a film about making films, which, as our longtime listeners will know, I love, but it is also not. It kind of doesn't really matter. It's about a parent and their children, and they do share an industry in some regard, but that's not necessarily the biggest part of the film. I love the cinematography. I don't know if it's just because in Norway at that time of year they had a delicious cloud cover, or if they had giant scrims for the exteriors, but I love the cinematography. The house itself was mostly, as I remember, white on the interior, kind of monochromatic. So there were some fun bases with some pops of color, and from a costuming perspective, I felt like the characters looked comfortable and normal, and almost like a Nordic girl next door for Nora. Instead of being like the bohemian or showing her to have like ratty clothes or something, I thought it all worked pretty well. Now, I don't follow fashion well enough to know if Elle Fanning's costumes were consistent with being a rich and famous Hollywood actress, but to me, I was never bumped by any of the production design.
No, I thought it was really well done, very beautiful. At the end, I saw that Elle's clothing were provided by Yves Saint Laurent. Or actually, the credits actually said just Saint Laurent, and I've never heard it without the Yves.
Yeah. Well,
But so I think, no, everything seemed very well in place. And I think it's not an accident that Nora would go into theater to maybe, because I agree with you, I think her and her father were a lot alike, but she wanted to probably distinguish herself in some way from her father to be in theater over film.
yeah. And as we've talked about before, there are certain important differences in theater acting versus cinema acting. But in this case, I got more the feeling that it had to do with her father. The character of, I think it was Agnes, the younger sister, at one point does some research. And I think this is pertinent for our discussion because this is an international film, which means more than just it wasn't shot in Georgia. But it's around the history of, I guess you would say, World War II and how that impacted this family. And one of the things that struck me about that is I think that arc landed differently for people whose country was invaded by the Nazis than it did for us. And the parallel I could see was perhaps Civil War, slavery. So when Louis Gates, what's the guy's name who does the history?
Yeah, Henry Louis Gates.
When Henry Louis Gates gets a celebrity there and they find out they have a relative who fought on the wrong side in the Civil War, was a slave owner, there's a lot of context that comes into play for the viewer. And I wonder if, as a person who did not live through World War II and whose state was not invaded, if I didn't have the same reaction to that as maybe the people in Norway would.
What movie are you talking about was filmed in Georgia?
Oh, just saying that they're not filmed in Hollywood anymore. Now everything is filmed in Georgia. That's at the Oscars.
Oh, okay.
A domestic film used to be filmed in Hollywood, but as I understand, there's no production in California anymore.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think like you mentioned a couple podcasts ago, I went in with fairly low expectations. I knew this was about a father-daughter relationship, but I didn't know much beyond that. And so I didn't really have high expectations, but I didn't have low ones either. I just didn't really, kind of went in blind. And I really enjoyed this movie. It was, like I said, it was very contemplative and enjoyable. And I thought true to the sometimes messy dynamics of family members. And especially when you have maybe some big, I don't want to say egos, but big personalities maybe. And not that her dad had like a big loud personality, but I think just being a well-known film director, he probably loomed large within the family, and he felt very proud of that. And so how does that affect your kids and then your grandkids? And then throw in, we didn't really talk about it, but there was a storyline of mental illness or within the family, like going back generations, and you saw that carried through each of the subsequent generations. And so I always find that kind of stuff fascinating. So I love this movie, and I highly recommend seeing it when it comes out on streaming.
Please keep in mind that Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.